I think particularly for an organization like yours, whether you like it or not, people are going to be commenting about you, sending you messages, sending inbound stuff. And if you're not careful, and if you don't deal with it correctly, it can actually have arguably a negative impact. And so, one way or another, it's something we need to pay attention to. But I think so many organizations that is sort of crept up on them. Also, the thing about organic social, I'll talk about it when we go into the slides, but it's not a direct response kind of immediate ROI play. So it's much harder to sort of make the case for investment as well. I think that's the other thing. Brian, is there anything you want to add to what Alice was saying?
I don't think so. Just underscore that this is a resource issue for us. It's something that's extremely difficult to manage. I think the difficulty that we're having right now is the same difficulty that I've had in my last 2 jobs, is that you have these groups or faculty or even student organizations that go rogue and start doing their own thing, which is not in line with the overall branding or messaging. And you want to be careful to not put a damper on that, because they're doing it for the right reason. They're passionate and they want to help the school, but they're not all marketers. So they just don't understand it. And trying to manage it is like trying to nail Jello to a tree. It's nearly impossible. And like Al said, we have one person that has 1 day a week dedicated towards social media. So, and the other difficulty is that there's no, I think there's no one recipe for success. It's so dependent on your organization and the structure and your product. And so there's no easy recipe.
Yeah, those are all really good points. They really are, especially the last one. I think it depends on your audience and even on the channel and obviously on your organization and what your objectives. Just out of interest, so the person who is dedicated 1 day a week, Alice, you mentioned they're not in your team. So which department are they in?
Don't really want to know that, but I say it, admissions team.
Okay, all right. So,
okay, admissions is very different from recruitment and marketing.
Yeah.
Apparently, she's very passionate about social media.
Yeah.
And I get, she knows her stuff in a way, but yet is not a social media marketer.
Yeah, I mean, there's some logic there, because I guess some of the questions are going to be about admissions, but it's probably a subset of the questions or comments. She responds. I mean, she does respond. Yeah, she's managing, monitoring it. It is all going. That's all kind of covered. It's just it's like we need a kind of strategy or some structure in place on how we do things. And as Brian said, people go rough a bit, and it's not no central point in a way. Yeah,
it brings it all together and posts it in a appropriate manner and try to make it a bit more, I don't know, exciting. It needs to be informational. It needs to be interesting,
Yeah.
Not just everything's ad hoc.
Yeah.
It's, and again, not branded. It's like it pains my eyes sometimes, because I'm a marketing person. But anyway.
Yeah.
They're doing our best.
Yeah, there's a few things to say. First of all, I want to say it's quite, we come across it a lot. Sometimes the organic social in some organizations will sit with the PR team. Sometimes it will sit with the marketing team. Often both want to play into it. And in your case, you've got the admissions team and there will be other departments that want to play into it. And in some ways, the thing about social media is to do it really well, it's kind of it is a person to person, it's a social thing. It's about people speaking with people, and arguably all of business is about that. So you definitely want strategy and you definitely want consistency, but there is a place for like the people within in my opinion, and in our opinion, I guess, as Mintvist. But we would almost, what's classically known as influencer marketing, there's almost a strand of that, which is ambassador marketing, which is people within your organization, or at least closely connected to it, who are influencers. They are influential to people in your marketplace, and you kind of want them to play into the strategy, but it won't really work if you dictate exactly what they say and how they say it and when. And in a university, setting, that might be student ambassadors who in normal times would be face to face in open days, as I think we've talked about before. And for organizations like Kinto, it might be specialists. In ICMA, it would definitely be specialists in certain specific areas. You might want them commenting on your stuff, and even on some case speaking on behalf of your brands, but obviously you can't fit them into a content calendar in the way that you could do your marketing team. So I'm really glad you raised some of these points, because they're all really good questions, and we'll build on them as we go through today. Should we come to Hannah next?
Sure. So I guess we've got kind of two sides and two answers to your question, Elliot. So the wider, bigger picture of Toyota and Lexus absolutely have got an entire social media team that actually sit within our press and PR function. So they are on social media, working on those platforms all day, every day, to making sure, obviously, that they can respond to inquiries. From a Kinto perspective, that's something that we haven't quite defined yet, but it's likely that they will support from a social perspective, just because similarly, I can't remember who it was now, I think it was Alice, about sort of a resource perspective. We don't have that within the Kinto team, and specifically the Kinto Join team, so it will likely sit within the wider Toyota and Lexus group, but as it stands, we haven't got much going on, only the bigger brand pages.
Thanks, Hannah. Should we come to Mariona?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I thought you were going to call on Mark on this one. So a lot of what the others have said has really resonated, because it sounds very familiar. On the broader association, we've got Twitter and LinkedIn pages. They're doing really, really well. But it's been in the recent years since we got someone who used to be on the market practice and regulatory policy team. And she's joined for 1 day a week, sort of spread through the week. And she's done a very, very good job in growing, looking at the analytics, but also growing the audience of the broader organization on Twitter and LinkedIn. That combined with the deputy head, who's also really supported her, and she's very good at finding time that she doesn't have to look at the analytics of how we're performing. And then the head of corporate communications, he's very keen and very good to look at aesthetics. So all these skills combined, I think, have really made the ICMA social media grow. On education, we've been a bit behind, but this year, Mark, that's well, I thought you called him, but obviously you wouldn't know that. But Mark's been very, very good at posting content that was relevant, whether it came from us or from broader news related to education and the education sector. So we've grown. He can tell you the exact numbers of how much we've grown in the last 3 months. But yeah, we're doing a lot better, I think, this year.
Yeah,
sounds intriguing.
I'm not going to say exact numbers because they're not that impressive. But the percentage-wise, if you look at percentage-wise, very impressive, very, very impressive. So what we actually did, it was, Mariana's absolutely right on what she's saying. She didn't mention one thing though. So when up until last year, we had a bunch of separate pages. So we'd have a page for the wider association. We had a page for the Future Leaders Group, which is another subcommittee of the association, for the Women's Network, and for education. So there were 4 social media presence. What we found was that each of the subgroups, so the education team, the Women's Network, and the Future Leaders, actually had 2 pages. They had a group and a page, and it was a little bit cumbersome. So at the end of last year, we decided to kind of do a big refresh. We started anew. So there would be 1 main page, and then there were 3 separate groups, of which one was education. And we started with a very small number of followers. And yeah, I mean, I've tried to make an effort to increase that number. And I think this year we've increased it over 100%, which has been great. we're not talking about tens of thousands of followers here, so it's not quite as, do you know what I mean? It's good percentage-wise. So, but it's something that we're looking at continuing to do. And in terms of what it means for us, I think I definitely understand your point about this not being a direct ROI type of activity. It's not like, okay, if I put 2 hours into developing my social media presence and I pay myself X amount an hour, then after Y amount of hours, I should be getting this sort of return. You can't, you wouldn't want to try and calculate it on that basis. I think it's more about the connections that you make, and hopefully somewhere down the line, more and more people start to engage with what you do, and it slowly builds traction, So that's the kind of approach we're taking on it. And I think my final point would be the biggest challenge has been the content. So it's important for us to try and, we've spoken about this in previous sessions, that education is very, very different from the objectives of the wide association. They're linked, but people don't, associations, JP Morgan doesn't join ICMA to train its staff. And so we have to think, okay, well, how do we post content that's going to be relevant to people who are interested in the association and the industry, but also linked to training. And it might be, for us, it might be stuff on certification, on wider movements in the industry, on exams, on the influences of working from home or studying from home. These type of things. And it is actually a bit of a pain, to be honest with you, sometimes just spending half an hour trawling through the internet, trying to find keywords to identify appropriate articles, which you can then post, and but hopefully it's worth it, who knows.
Yeah, there were loads of good points there. I'm going to show you some stats in a moment, and there's definitely, particularly if you're doing it on LinkedIn, particularly as a B2B organization, it definitely looks like positioning yourself like you are, is going to be more and more valuable going forward, as we'll see in a few slides time. Just to clarify then, so you're going and finding content and you're repurposing it and you're sharing it and you're using your own content. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, so we want to, I think one of the key things for me, the way that I've always approached social media from a business perspective, is to ensure that if you're going to have a channel, you've got to keep it active. You've got to keep it updated. You've got to keep it relevant. So I think one of the worst things you can do is, get an old Facebook page and the last post was 18 months ago. That's, you're not going to get any worse type of advertising for an organization, I think. So for us, it's finding content and saying, this is an interesting article that was in the Guardian, or that was in a, we found this on another site, or it was a repurposed LinkedIn post that someone did, whatever it is. Plus, let's face it, we're advertising our own courses, right? Coming up in April, we've got courses X, Y, and Z, or don't miss this new course coming up in, later in the year type thing. So it's kind of a mix of both.
Yeah. All right, perfect. And varying up content is absolutely the right thing to do. Stefania, do you want to say a few words on what Unit broadly are doing?
Now, our main accounts, Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, are based in Italy, but we do have local ones for Facebook and Twitter. Facebook, we started with a new one. We had an old one, then we relaunched it with the help of an agency, November 2019, so it's not very old. And we went up to about 6,500 followers. But then, from then, I deal with it. I post on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. It's very difficult to grow without paid advertising. So, of course, I post interesting videos about Italy, especially at the moment. It's just keeping interest alive in Italy, showing different aspects. And then you do get some people that join in, not very many. I reply to questions. I put, you know, the likes, try to, you know, keep the interest alive. But I think if we want to grow, we need to, again, do some paid. Organic growth is very slow. Twitter is even worse. You know, Twitter is very, very slow. It's Twitter anyway, in my view, is more B2C than B2B than B2C for us. You know, I have a lot of journalists and writers that follow Twitter, but not so many members of the public. Instagram, we don't have a local account. So definitely it's something that I would like to improve. But again, as we explained, it's only 4 of us in the UK and Ireland, and I have to do other things as well. So this social media is a small part of my job, but I would like to grow it. It's very interesting. I find it interesting, but to grow it organically, I really don't know how, apart from trying, you know, to be interesting and posting.
Look, hopefully you'll pick up some really good tips today. I think you will. Flavio, do you want to add anything?
Well, not much time. Stefania said it all, really. The only thing that we always used so far until pre-COVID, it was just very passive. I mean, just images of Italy and events, so our activities we were advertising. Whereas now with the pandemic and we were really not many choices to do, many opportunities to do our activities, we turned into everything to digital, so to the social media. So one with video help, with the Instagram sponsored ads we did. So we became more, or with film group or influencers we did. So we are using it as well. Not only it's just there as a window for our products, which is Italy, the images, but also we are more active and proactive with the social media we have become with this current situation.
Yeah, good. Because look, social media is fun. So let me before I speak, let me just let's get into the slides and we'll go through it. I'm going to start off with the basics. Some people here, it's gonna, you know, you're gonna know all this, but I'll move through quite quickly because we've got a mix of different people on the group. But I am going to start with the basics and then we'll go into some stats. Thank you for sharing that. It's a really good base for what we're going to be talking about going forward. Just to sort of open up then. So again, with as always with marketing, we've got so many different acronyms and buzzwords. So the organic social media marketing sometimes is referred to as SMO. So it's like social media optimization, as opposed to SME, social media advertising. But you know, that it's not always the case. But one thing's for sure, we can, if we think about SEO and AdWords, SEM, the equivalent here is we've got organic social and we've got social media advertising. I think with social media, the differences between the organic and the advertising are more stark. So it is the case that you know, you can do social media advertising and it's all about getting direct response and getting conversions and things like that, and you don't need to do anything on the organic side if getting leads is just what you want. However, the organic side of social media, for me, it is a really important part of a strategy for almost any organization in almost any sector, because one thing's for sure, social media is going to continue to change. The channels are going to change, but they're not going anywhere. And as we'll see, more and more people are using it, but also they're using it they're more engaged in the platforms. And so if our audience is going to be there, then, you know, we probably want to be there as well. So for the rest of today, we're going to be talking only about the organic stuff. And I'm going to use some mildly dated examples here, but I'm going to use like some famous celebrities to try and make the point about how reach and engagement works. Because with organic social, theoretically, you can get both of these things. You can reach, you know, hopefully large numbers of audience, but we can reach new audiences. And what's really important is the engagement stuff, though, as we'll sort of see. But But if we think about sort of famous, you know, celebrities, someone like Beyonce is famous all over the world. She has massive reach. Everyone, you know, a lot of people know her, and if she says something, a lot of people are gonna sort of come across that message. She's, as celebrities go, someone like Katy Perry also has a lot of reach, but she's much better in quotes than Beyonce at doing the engagement stuff from a social media perspective. So Katy Perry, the sorts of, well, first of all, she posts more, you know, she posts on social media. Beyonce doesn't really go there as a personal brand. Katy, but not only that, but the way the tactics that she employs are all about creating engagements with her audiences. Arguably, you know, social media channels have historically been more relevant for Katy Perry, given the sorts of audiences that she would be going after as a personal brand. But she does things like she went live on multiple platforms for, I think, 4 days in a row a few years ago, and had a whole bunch of stunts during those 4 days where she, you know, went to a psychotherapy session. She did a cooking class with famous chefs, and you know, did various other things, all in the run up to releasing, you know, an album. And of that engagement work motivated, excited her existing fan base. These people who already knew about her. It wasn't necessarily about creating new audiences, although it did. The primary objective was to engage existing audiences so that when the new album was released, you know, you could maximize sales. So Katy Perry's really good at engagement. Beyonce's really good at reach. But social media marketing, if it's done well, you know, it can do both. So you want to try and create awareness at the top of the funnel. You want to create that content that exposes you to new and wider audiences. But we also really, and for me, probably typically the primary objective of organic social media is to not necessarily nurture your own community. It might be the case that it's more appropriate for your brand to engage within other people's communities, you know, and, you know, you might sort of be able to nurture a sub community within a community. The bottom line is we want to be present in the conversations that are relevant to our brand and relevant to our audiences, and that's, you know, a large part of what we're going to be talking about. So let's talk about celebrity. You know, one of my favorite, it's my guilty pleasure celebrity. I was a Kim Kardashian fan for a long time, but she's very good at doing the awareness stuff. This image is famous for sort of breaking the internet. So she creates these kind of pretty extreme images, and, you know, explicitly states, I want to break the internet with these types of images, and they tend to get a lot of reach. They obviously get a lot of publicity and all the rest of it. But she's also, you know, historically, obviously not anymore, but the TV show, the events, the, you know, meetups with fans and things like that. She's very, very conscious that engaging her existing fan base, in the case of a personal brand, you know, is a big part of her job. So she does both angles, you know, very, very well indeed. So while we're talking about engagement, let's just sort of show a couple of brands, and then just talk about typically what engagement rate means. So an engagement rate is a way of measuring how good a brand or a profile is at engaging their existing audiences. So just typically you know, and we'll talk about tools going forward, but just the broad brush way of doing this is looking at the total number of followers. And this is Instagram, but you can do the same for any channel. Look at the total number of followers, and then the average number of engagements, meaning likes or comments, you know, or shares. Express the average engagement as a percentage of your first level connection following, and that will give you engagement rates. So 800,000 as a percentage of 80 million, you know, is 1%. Now, if you're a brand like Nike and you've got nearly 100 million followers, then an engagement rate of 1%, you know, is very, very good. If you benchmark that against other brands that have that many followers, and there aren't many, but if you do, then you'll see that's pretty good. And the reason why you know, by the way, as you come down in the average, as you come down in network size, you should get an uptick in engagement rate. So as individuals, as you know, me as a person, you know, I might have, I don't know, 200 followers or something like that on Instagram. If I post, I'm going to get engagement rates much higher, something like 25% or something like that. But as you trend up, it's normal for your engagement rate to come down, and it's partly because of what we were talking about a few weeks ago. The organic reach of content, you know, is not quite once it was. So the larger the audience you have, the lower amount of them that you're able to reach, at least organically. But 1%, 100 million, you know, is quite good. The reason why it's quite good is Nike are pretty consistent with their strategy across most of their channels, but particularly on Instagram, it's all about the inspirational stuff. It's you know, it's a tactic they've been running for a long time now with their just do it sort of slogan, and you know, they'll have famous people, they'll have regular people on their posts and their video posts and their image posts, but most of the, you know, the storytelling that goes on this platform, it's all about inspiration. So the audience that engage with this content, you know, they like that content, and if Nike keeps giving them that, then they can assume that they'll maintain this, you know, reasonably good engagement rate. So Zara is a brand that doesn't create as much engagement as they should, certainly as competitors with similar numbers of in similar sectors with similar number of followers. So 28 million, you know, on average, they'll get about 25 million. Let's round that down to, and let's round this up to 50,000. That's at 0.25% engagement rate, and that's not so good. And arguably, the reason why Zara is not getting the engagement that they should be, or at least one of the reasons, will be that the posts are, you know, they look like they've been sort of come out of a catalogue. There's not much in them that motivates the audience to engage with that content. So a lower engagement rate for Zara. I'm going to switch tack now and give some pointers about the landscape and some of the trends that are happening by channel, and then we'll stop and sort of go into some questions and comments. So if you've got a question or comment, we'll come to it in just a moment. But so in preparing these stats, there's a really good annual report that's created by a few firms that work in social media, including Hootsuite. They sort of collaborate to create this data. And there's a link in the LinkedIn group. You can download this report, and it's like, yeah, it's huge, and it's for every country in the world. So there's a separate report for every country in the world, and then there's a global one as well. So I've taken the stats here for the UK, and I've gone back to the one from 2 years ago. So 2019 is the top line, and 2021, so January 2021 stats are the bottom line. I'll just sort of talk through these in a moment. So the total number of active social media users in the UK is 45 million. The population is about 65 million. So in 2019, that was 67, nearly 70% of the population. The total number of active users, yeah, unsurprisingly, it's sort of nudging up. We're almost at saturation point now. It's probably just, you know, a certain segment of the population that's not on social media, but, you know, getting on for 80% is already. So that's kind of, you know, you would expect that. But I think for me, the really interesting one is the total number of active social media users. So of this number, how many of them are accessing via the mobile, via mobile devices? So it was over half even back in 2019. But now in 2021, we're at virtually everyone who is an active social media user is doing it at least some of the time on their mobile. So I don't think that's necessarily going to be a surprise to people that, you know, lots of people use social media on their mobile, but the fact that virtually everyone's using it on the mobile, and the fact that the numbers jump so quickly, gives you an idea about you know, the nature of the way that people are doing this. So it's become part of their lives. So when you're on your mobile, you're out and about, and you know, we're using social media increasingly as part of our lives, or virtually all of the population is, and this is UK stats, remember. So I suppose the other key takeaway is here, the concept of mobile advertising has kind of gone away now. Social, is mobile. And if you want to advertise exclusively to mobile handsets, then that's just a setting and advertising. The average time spent on social media, has not increased. In fact, it's very mildly decreased. So we're not spending more time. It's about behavioral changes, and the switch to mobile is one of them. But let's have a look at some more stats. So, per percentage of people, so this is percentage of people who have done it in the last month. So the previous stats were, active users. So again, it's virtually everyone, unsurprising. But the percentage of people who are contributing, so this is people who are actually posting content and creating content and engaging on the platforms, it's gone up, a lot. Again, it's nearly, of people who use social media, 90% nearly of them are contributing to the conversation, which is a reasonably significant jump. Again, the number of actual platforms we're using hasn't increased. It's very mildly decreased. We're sort of plateauing at 7. So it's not a case of we want loads more platforms. We've got our platforms, but we're going to be using them on mobile, and we're going to be contributing, to an increasing frequency. And then the other really interesting stat, particularly for someone like Mark, who's investing time in positioning his brand on LinkedIn, is that the number of people who are using social media for work purposes has more than doubled in just 2 years. And there's no reason to think that trend's not going to continue. So social media is becoming much more widely accepted than it ever was as as channels for work. And then again, these stats are from the UK. The links to the global thing will sort of give you for the world. The UK stats, as you would expect, will broadly be reflective of what you see in Europe and North America. So the main change, I haven't put the 2019 stats, but the main change is Facebook was number 1 and YouTube was number 2, and those two have swapped now. So the penetration from YouTube in terms of internet users is really astounding. So YouTube is, so you might not necessarily think about it as a social media network, and I'm not saying that you do have to think about it as a social media network, but as a channel, it's really important. Facebook, it really is the big daddy. And when you think about, in number 3, there's WhatsApp, owned by Facebook, Facebook Messenger, obviously owned by Facebook, Instagram, also owned by Facebook. If you look at the channels independently, Instagram, is growing way quicker than Facebook. So Facebook as a channel by itself has kind of plateaued. It's not to say there's anything wrong with it, but it's plateaued in terms of penetration, and Instagram's growing. And then in the UK, Twitter is a significant channel. More so, you will find it has more penetration than European countries. And then LinkedIn is growing, fast. LinkedIn is also a fast-growing channel. Okay, I'll just briefly talk about the platforms, then we'll go into some questions before we go into the last section of slides, where we'll go into a bit more detail about actual strategy. So this is laying the groundwork. This is laying some foundations here. So Facebook audiences, as you would expect, it's 38 million out of a population of 65 million or so. So huge penetration, potential advertising reach compared to the total population. You can reach 2/3 of the population. The quarter-on-quarter growth in terms of reach, as we mentioned, the growth in numbers is sort of plateaued for Facebook. So there's not really any significant growth, and it's pretty even in terms of its mix between male and female. YouTube, its advertising reach is 85% of the population, which is insane. And in terms of males to females, again, it's a big split. We'll talk more about YouTube advertising when we talk about social, when we talk about the advertising weeks next week and the week after. But YouTube there's a big opportunity for an advertising play from an organic perspective, it's not an easy nut to crack, but you know, there is an advertising play there because there are so many users, there are so many people consuming that content, and you know, Generation Z and Generation Alpha, which is the ones below them, they're really all over it. Instagram, yeah, as we mentioned, it's growing, still growing very quickly in the UK and in many other markets. The reach is obviously getting bigger because of that growth. And then there's a slant towards females. It's 58%, 59% nearly of female users. And then LinkedIn, as we mentioned, it's also growing, you know, very well. It's even though it's a B2B focused platform, it's got really strong reach, and there's a slightly larger number of male users than female. Twitter, again, 60% male, 40% female. The advertising reach from Twitter, you know, is not quite as high as it would be. It's quite as high as it has been. I think, to be fair to Twitter, they've done a really good job of pruning spam accounts. There are still a lot on there, but they've been pruning lots over the last couple of years, and that's improved the quality, but it's potentially made the reach look a bit smaller. And then Pinterest, I thought I'll put in there because this is the reason why some people are interested in this channel. Is, you know, if your brand or service is particularly going after females, then you know, this is a platform that's dominated by female users. And in the UK, it's a growing platform, and they've recently developed their advertising capability. Okay, so let's sort of drop in and ask a few questions. So we mentioned a few channels there. Which channels are your organization using, and you know, are there any differences in the way that you're using those different channels? Should we come to Sandra first?
Yeah, sure. For us, for kind of the B2B part of it, it's mainly LinkedIn and Twitter that we're using, particularly kind of sharing relevant industry news, or kind of, you know, being featured in like PR week and things like that. So like very focused on that aspect. So like really like B2B driven. But we do also have Instagram, which is more kind of like insights into agency life and kind of, yeah, this is what we get up to. I don't know, like painting walls and things like that. So a bit more fun, I'd say, than the more kind of serious things on LinkedIn and Twitter.
Yeah, no, thanks, Sandra. That's really cool. That's you see that, you know, that behind the scenes view of someone like an agency. You know, it's important when people work with agencies. Oftentimes they want to know who they're going to be working with in a wider sense, and that's sort of one way of achieving that. Mark, I don't know if obviously your LinkedIn's your focus, but are there other channels in play for you? And is there any other sort of point or insight you would like to point out based on that stuff?
No, I mean, we made a conscious effort, I think, at the beginning of lockdown last year, about a year ago, to try and grow the LinkedIn business or the LinkedIn platform. And I think that's the nature of our industry. You know, people are not going to be engaging with us on Facebook so much or other things like that. Although, interestingly enough, you know, as you'll know from our work with MintTwist, that in terms of paid campaigns, you know, Facebook's not a bad channel for us. But no, we're concentrating on LinkedIn, and I think it's really interesting, actually, that's almost, well, over doubled in the last 2 years. So I think we're on the right track. The only other one that I'd mention is YouTube. And we have our own YouTube channel. We link a lot of our stuff on our website to the YouTube clips, and it's something I think we want to build. But again, I mean, it's a pretty daunting. YouTube is a pretty daunting thing. I don't think we'd ever consider advertising, for example, on YouTube, because yeah, I think the market's almost a bit too broad for us, being a reasonably niche organization. So it's something that we want to be there. We want people to be able to find us there if they're looking. But for us, the focus is definitely going to be LinkedIn.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. The thing about YouTube, it is because there is massive SEO benefit. We only really scratched the surface when we talked about YouTube in the SEO context last week. But if you embed a YouTube video onto a page, the engagement rate on that page, so we're going to do analytics in the last week, the time on site will be higher, the bounce rate will be lower, the if there are any actions that you're tracking on there, the conversion rate on those actions will be higher. So YouTube, if you're going to create video to put on your site, it makes sense to put it on YouTube, even if you're not going to promote yourself on YouTube, because it's on YouTube and then you embed it onto the site, you get the SEO uplift. So I think that's it's not necessarily, so what you're saying is right. If you're going to create videos, put them on YouTube. You don't necessarily have to go about promoting yourself as a kind of YouTube brand.
I'm pleased that we're doing it the right way.
yeah, and I thought you'd be pleased on that stat of growth of business use as well.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, for me, the biggest issue about this whole thing is the engagement with the content. I think that's my bit. You know, we've been trying to grow the following and find different strategies to get more people to follow the page. And that's been working pretty well. And you know, we've set some reasonably ambitious targets for this year and then moving on. But I think if you were to do this at the expense of really creating, like, you know, posting links to articles and things are all well and good, but I think it's not really that. I mean, we can see from the channel that it's not really that engaging for our audience. So that's our biggest challenge, is like, okay, well, if that's not really worth advertising on there, and a few people are liking that, it's okay. So there's something, but it's not great. You know, we're posting articles from papers and from various magazines and bits and pieces, and one or two people sort of say, yeah, okay, that's really interesting, but not many. So then we really need to think, well, okay, if that doesn't work and that doesn't work, how do we recreate some engagement? You know, and I think that's kind of our next challenge there.
Yeah. Look, in the next section, I'm going to talk about like the key things that sort of underpin strategy. I'm going to go into some detail. So rather than me comment on that just now, let's get through the next section and we'll have a Q&A at the end. Mariona, is there anything you want to add to that?
No, just I completely agree that the engagement is the next stage, and we've already started talking about whether we can use quiz questions that we've got on the website or what we can use to create engagement. And that's the first thing I thought when you started talking about that. We do use Twitter as well as a broader association. Education, we don't get as much, as many tweets there, just because from what we've said, we're not the main activity of the company. But as an association, we've got Twitter, and that would be a different approach that we take, I suppose, to both platforms, Twitter and LinkedIn. On LinkedIn, we've got it all sort of separate, whereas on Twitter, we just didn't have enough people that would follow us, so we just have IGMA. And there was something else that Mark said that made me think, but I can't remember what it was.
Okay. Should we come, Brian?
Yeah, I don't know how much I can speak about this. I do know that currently we use Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. But when I use the term use, I'm being very generous because we're not really using it to its best. But we do have links in our signature lines. We do try to post things when we can. But again, it goes back to resources and content development. Like putting something out there that's useful and relevant and timely is our big struggle.
Yeah, but look, it sounds like they're the right platforms. Alice, have you looked into any of the other platforms like TikTok or Snapchat or anything like that?
Yeah, but as it was paid social media, Elliot. So yeah, which we will cover next week, I suppose, right?
Yeah, we'll certainly talk about the paid. Yeah. As
paid, yes, but what Brian said, organic is what we're using is what Brian just said. And a little bit of YouTube. There are some videos, but again, room for improvement. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Alice. So look, Stefania, Flavio, Hannah, any questions or thoughts or comments from you guys?
Not really, no.
I don't think much from my side either. I don't think I'm probably not close enough to the social media team to know what we're doing from a broader perspective. But I think the B2B audience is the one that we will focus on, certainly for Kinto Join. But how that fits into the bigger picture of Kinto and all of our products. I'm not sure, but I think we'll probably try and have a collective approach to social media, because and I know Mark, you touched on this earlier about having the different profiles for different sides of the business. Actually, you could end up with so many. So I think we'll probably try and refine it as best we can.
Yeah. No, thanks, Hannah. And consolidating pages on LinkedIn seems to be, Mintos have obviously worked with a lot of different clients, and it does seem to be a bit of a recurring theme that at some stage 5 years ago, people were setting up pages left, right, and center, and actually there is a significant benefit where it's broadly the same audience to consolidate it. And then there's, you can have groups, which is what Mark was talking about. There's also things called showcase pages, which is something that's worth looking into for the B2B open Q&A. So I won't go around the room. Just, let's just shout out your questions, as soon as we go into that section. So I will share my screen and we'll get going. Okay. So as is the case with all sort of strategies, we definitely want to start off with our objectives, and then the goals that sit under those objectives, and then the metrics that we can use to measure those goals. So an objective, typical objectives for social media might be grow the brand, so the brand awareness thing, but then turning customers into advocates. So customers, not just customers, but also our network. And this is where the engagement bit works. If we're able to engage with our existing followers and or hopefully customers will be a subset of that, then we can create engagement and we can create advocates, and brand equity, I guess. We will start to be recognized as sort of contributors to whatever communities are relevant for our brand. So that, for me, that green one's, very often the sorts of objective that brands would want to make the primary one. But having said that, you can also drive sales and leads from this, and a goal in that sense would be the return on investment. And when we look at analytics, in week 7, then we'll sort of see how we can measure the performance of organic social in the context of analytics goals on our actual websites. And then for some brands, particularly if you're talking about hospitality or something like that, where there's kind of repeat purchases going on or repeat customers, then retention and loyalty, and if reviews are important to us, then there might be a social media component. There might be a social media tactic that helps us sort of optimize reviews, or review scores rather. And then obviously for some B2C brands, I don't, possibly Richmond, but certainly e-commerce brands and things like that, then there's very often a customer service element that's involved. And in some cases, that's going to be a problem, because social media channels could be where a lot of negative feedback, ends up in some cases. So it might be, there might be objectives, and then we might have a few of those types of objectives in there. And obviously, I beg your pardon, before I move on from that slide, these are the types of metrics. So reach, impressions, what's the size of our audience? How many mentions are we getting? Engagement is more about that engagement rate percentage that I was talking about, and maximizing that, and then watching which posts get the most engagement, doing more of those. And and so the metrics flow from the goals. The elements to include in an audit. So with a sort of social media strategy, we want to start off with some element of audit. So we do want to analyze our current audience, meaning our current followers by channel, but we also want to look at the competitors, because as always, especially in digital, you can learn a huge amount from competitors. So the ones who are doing really well, first of all, their audiences, can we engage those audiences, proactively engage those audience and pull them into our own sort of sphere of influence. Secondly, what tactics are they using on the channels, and what tactics are generating what sort of engagement rates? This is going to inform our posting strategy for that particular channel. And then similarly, what are they doing that's not working so well? Let's not do that. And so the competitor analysis piece is really important. And there's all sorts of social media listening tools that that agencies and others can use to go quite deep and quite granular on the competitor stuff, but you can learn a huge amount from it. And once you've analyzed what you're doing, what the competitors are doing, then you can kind of optimize your profile setup. So how are you presenting yourself in terms of your home profile on these channels? And measuring, obviously you would have a content strategy, a posting strategy, as we'll talk about, and then measuring how you're doing and then benchmarking it against what you were doing previously, but also what your competitors are doing. And then that's, once you've got those things in place, then you've got a roadmap to success. So I sort of touched it, but what's going on in your industry? What are the competitors doing? What are the other industry players doing? Let's learn about that, and let's see what they're doing well, what they're not doing so well, and then it helps us set our targets, as we said. So the idea of social listening is that there are tools that you can use to analyze all of the conversations that are happening, on whichever channel you want. And if you are listening for mentions of key phrases that are relevant from an industry perspective or relevant to you specifically as a brand perspective, and you're looking at the sorts of questions and sorts of conversations that are happening around those keywords and what hashtags are being used, then that is obviously also information that we can put into our strategy. And once we're running our strategy, we can continue listening to see what the impact of our own posting schedule is having on those conversations. So social listening, sorry for the content heavy slides. So these slides, you can download them from the LinkedIn group. So I won't repeat everything in here, but social listening allows us to access the performance of our content strategy. It allows us to engage with our customers. And what we mean by this is, if customers are using our handles on our platforms, typically we'll get notifications, and if we're using tools, then they will end up in the inboxes of our tools. But for many brands, customers or audiences will not use our handles. In fact, in most cases, 70% on average for a given brand in a given industry, 70% of mentions are not using the handles. So social listening allows us to monitor, as we mentioned, specific phrases, whether they're used as a handle or not. So we'll be able to join in those conversations that we would otherwise have missed. And that's a really important component. A lot of the tools look at sentiment. So if we're in a space where there's the potential to have some negative feedback, then we can jump on that negative feedback and hopefully mitigate that by either taking it offline or responding to it. As we said, social listening, once you set it up, you can track those competitors and you can track hashtags. You can identify, this is another important one, if there are particular profiles that are not competitors or not traditional industry players, but are influential in the conversations, then we want to track those. And they might be classical influencers, or they might be indirect influencers and individuals and or brands, even if they're from another sector, that we can engage with ourselves in order to draw down on the sorts of audience that they're commanding. And this is just a picture of how the sentiment things work. So a lot of the social listening tools will use artificial intelligence, and they'll examine a conversation and work out whether there's a negative perception or a positive perception, or whether it's neutral. These things are not perfect, but they are improving significantly as natural language processing improves and AI improves. So in summary, social listening allows us to build relationships, brand reputation, discover new opportunities and threats through listening to what's going on. So the general sort of idea is we listen, we make a strategy, we implement it, and we carry on listening. So that sort of the thing about optimizing our profiles then. So consistency, you know, it helps. And, you know, I think Alice touched on this. If we've got a consistent, you know, username and a handle and a consistent background and a consistent icon, then we start to build, build our, I guess, brand equity. We're able to be perceived consistently across channels. So the cover photo is important. Obviously, the way that we write the bio and the way that we write, you know, the title tags, these are typically the things that are going to potentially motivate someone to click from a profile page onto our actual website. So when we talk about click-throughs to a website, and we'll look at this when we talk about analytics, you know, from a channel like LinkedIn, what do people actually do when they come from LinkedIn and go to our site? To what extent do they, you know, sign up for our events or fill out an inquiry form? And what we find is with organizations that have some form of social media marketing strategy that's working quite well, if it's a B2B organization and they're on LinkedIn, if you get click-throughs from the profile page, then they tend to convert very, very, very well. In some cases, they're the best converting channel on a website. Now, you won't get huge numbers, but the numbers that do convert very well. And it's a bit like, you know, the metadata in our sort of in our most important pages. If we write the bio really well, we can have quite significant impacts on the percentages of people that are clicking through from those profiles. And then UTMs, that's a way of sort of tracking click-through rates, and UTMs will help give even more visibility on exactly where users came from within your social channels. This is, so obviously if we're using links in our actual posts, then, you know, the same sort of applies there really. Check how discoverable you are in social media searches. You know, a channel like, you know, well, any of the social channels, they will all offer search capability. And so just having an understanding about how visible you are for obviously your brand phrases, but also other relevant phrases is worthwhile. And that's going to inform how the sorts of content you put on your profile. Pinning, you know, is a thing. So pinning your most engaging posts at the top of your profiles for some channels is really important. And then knowing obviously optimal formats in which to post content, you know, is really important. And then potentially hashtags. It's not really mentioned here, but in some of the platforms, you know, notably Twitter, you know, hashtags and Instagram, hashtags play an important role, even on the profile, even in terms of how they're used on the profile, not just the posts. And then a couple of people I think have already touched on that. I think Sandra mentioned this. So a strategy for each channel. So, you know, this particular makeup brand, for our makeup tutorials, we put them on YouTube and we put them on Instagram, but Twitter is all about customer service. So having a really clear idea about which channel is for what is definitely a good idea. It's definitely a good idea. You know, and if you don't have that at the moment, it's okay. But if you look at your channels, you'll probably see that really you should be led. It would be nice if you've got a proactive strategy, but in some cases you're going to be led by consumer behavior. I've seen a lot of B2C brands that try and make their Twitter do something, but actually people just want to talk about when their package is going to arrive. And if that's the case, you might have to pivot your strategy. Okay, social media calendar. And so we spoke a few weeks ago about content calendars, and you know, these are essentially a content strategy would feed directly into a social media strategy as well as an SEO strategy. So there's a close correlation here with content calendars. But it tends to go into a bit more detail. I'll show you sort of what we mean by that in the next slide. But before we talk about that, let's talk about varying the content. So it is important not to just, you know, and Mark's touched on this already, it's not just a case of sell your business, sell your products, sell your services with every post. We definitely want to vary the content types. So there's a bunch of different ways of looking at it, but some people talk about the 80-20 rule. So 80% of content should either inform, educate, or entertain your audience. And there's this thing that people talk about when they talk about social media content or YouTube content. Either you want to inform the user, so give them a bit of insight about about a thing that's going to be interesting them, or you educate them, you really dig into the details about a topic, or you entertain them. Users tend to go for social media to be informed, to be educated, to be entertained. Potentially the fourth one is be inspired as well. You can put that in there if you like, but you kind of want to fit in one of those boxes. It's difficult to be genuinely educational and entertaining at the same time, although I try as hard as I possibly can. But it's probably best to work out which is what's the primary purpose of that piece of content. And then, but having said that, we're marketeers, so having 20% of our content, to sell or promote our brands directly is okay, as long as we don't saturate our channels with that type of content, because as we all know, it's unlikely to be as engaging. Then the other way of looking at it, some people talk about the rule of thirds. So a third of content, is promoting the business and is sort of salesy, I guess. A third of the content is about sharing insights and ideas, and this would be the educate and inform stuff. And then the other third, if you're the sort of brands that wants to bring out the brand personalities and potentially the people and the story behind the brands, then another third can be that type of content. And then once you've worked out sort of which of those strategies you're going to use, or if it's something else similar, then there's a really nice way to think about it is you've got topics and you've got formats, and this will really allow you to create a huge amount of variation. So the topics, first of all, I suppose what's really important to say is a content strategy is going to pull out the topics that are relevant for the audiences that are relevant for you. So a content strategy would have looked at audiences, would have looked at what they're talking about, would have looked at your industry and competitors and looked at what they're talking about. And then it's going to say, we think we should talk about these sorts of things for these sorts of people, potentially with these sorts of tactics. So a lot of this work might already be done, but those topics are going to be a combination of all of these things. And in terms of the actual topic, it might fit into one of these responses. It might be answering a commonly asked question that your audience asks. It might be recognizing something that's going on in your industry. It might be some updates or some news or some tips. And then again, informational, thought-provoking, inspirational, or informative. And then on formats, there are so many that we can choose from. We've obviously got image posts, we've got video posts, we've got stories, we've got files, polls, live streaming. There's so many different formats. So topics, formats, and then your calendar. If you're talking about, many brands will be posting on a daily basis or several times a week, but whatever your frequency is, you've got it down the left hand side and you've got different tabs for each month, and you talk about you cover the topics that your content strategy needs to cover, and you can play with the formats, and you might be able to repurpose pieces of content so that the same bits of content appears in 3 or 4 different formats. You specify the creative and you talk about which channels it's going to go to. That's the idea behind a social media posting calendar, if you like. So there's structure to it, as opposed to just someone making it up as they go along. Tone of voice, obviously we've got hopefully we'll have an idea of our brand guidelines, and we've got to keep them in mind. But in general with social media, if we want to write from the reader's perspective, so it should be a kind of, social media is one person talking to another person, even if we're talking on behalf of our brands. And there might be exceptions to this, but in the main, we would suggest, if you say you mean the user, you're talking to the user. We're trying to speak directly to the user. avoiding too much jargon, is definitely really important. And then consistency across the channels will eventually pay dividends. This is a screenshot really. There are lots of tools that allow you to schedule posts. So if we've got organized enough to create a content strategy, and then we've got a social media posting calendar that's probably going to leverage off the content that we're creating from our content strategy, and so we know we're covering the right topics, and we've got several different formats for each post, so we're repurposing them to maximize the sort of value we're getting out of them, and we know which channels we're going to post and what time of day. Then we can go a step further potentially and start scheduling this stuff, so we don't actually have to sit there and press post. And there are lots of tools to do this, and some of them are really low cost. Calendars are live documents. You've got a as we said, the social media listening tools that you're running, typically you'll be looking at them at least on a monthly basis, and then adjusting what you're doing based on what's working and what's not. I'm gonna go quite quick now because I want to leave time for questions. So engagement is really, really important, as we kind of said right from the offset. There's two ways of looking at this. There's public engagement. So if we've got a sort of LinkedIn post going on our main LinkedIn homepage, and we're writing and responding to people, that's visible to the entire public. Private engagement might be something like a LinkedIn group or a direct message channel. Public engagement is something we want to create. So, as part of varying our content, asking questions that invite responses. Polls is one way of looking at it, but also just actually asking a question is sort of one way to do that. Following people who are following us, why not follow them back? Why not engage with some of their content, publicly? And then private engagement, sort of touched on there. We've got, a lot of the channels will have groups, say LinkedIn groups. By the way, a lot of people sort of moan about Facebook engagement, organic engagement being quite low, and it is low. I spoke earlier on about Instagram engagement, being 1% for really big profiles, and more than that for individual profiles that are smaller. On average, Instagram is about 4%. That's like on average across everything for organic engagement posts on engagement on organic posts. For Facebook, it's about 0.4%. So it's 10 times less engagement. Having said that, if there are plenty of brands that have really, really successful Facebook groups where you get like really high engagement, like 25, 30%. So a group of 100 people and virtually everyone commenting on stuff. So closed groups, smaller number of people. If you do it right, you can get a lot of engagement. Obviously, direct messages, it's one-to-one communication. And, that's in some ways, that's the best. Obviously, it takes time to sort of facilitate that, to make that work. But, it's great. And we spoke about chatbots and things that can potentially help there. So look, there's lots of benefits to private engagement, but probably the main one to think about there is number 7. If you're having a direct interaction with actual people, whether they're doing that on the behalf of a brand or not, then that's a real world connection, if you like, which is, we're not relying on an algorithm at that point. Okay, so just some things to note then. So we've touched on it a couple of times. So this is an example graphic based on an organic post that was boosted with a really modest amount of money. I can't remember how much it was. I think it was tens of pounds. And the really thin strip of light blue is the organic reach. So you can significantly increase reach in terms of impressions by a relatively small budget on a platform, particularly like Facebook. I'm not saying that you should always do that. I'm just saying, I think Stefania made the point, there's not much you can do unless you put a bit of paid behind it. To a certain extent, that's true. Having said that, I do think you want to get your strategy right so you're getting some traction. And if you're getting some traction and you're confident about the posts that you're creating, what I mean by that is you're confident that your audience actually wants to engage them and they actually like them, then it might be worth considering boosting that content. You don't want to boost content that it might get lots of impressions, but no one's really going to engage with it. So you've got to be careful with paid to support organic. Just some things to note. We've already said social media is inherently mobile. Video is becoming increasingly important. All of the story formats, but in the other formats, video, is a thing. And working out a cost-effective way of producing, video, I think is going to be on the to-do list for lots and lots of marketers going forward. I've sort of implied this, but not said it directly. So ephemeral, so storytelling type content, is a trend that's been in play now for a while, but it's still in play. So can we make our content so that it's episodic, so that it builds on top of each other and it's telling a story? If we can do that, then we're onto something good. Live streaming during the pandemic in particular, it's become increasingly important for lots of brands. And then the final one I thought I'd chuck in there is Clubhouse. I don't know if anyone's heard of Clubhouse or if they are on it, but the key thing about Clubhouse itself is in vogue at the moment. But what it really is, it's what do you call it? It's like live, instantaneous, audio social media platform. So it's an audio only platform. There's no images, there's no videos. You go into the platform, you enter little rooms, and you can listen to what's being said in that room. You can put your hand up, virtually put your hand up, and if the administrator of that room chooses you, you can contribute via voice. So it's not dissimilar to a kind of social media networking version of what we're doing here, except you would have people dropping in and out of this sort of thing. So that a lot of people are saying that these sorts of channels are going to be increasingly important going forward. And that's the end. We've got about 10 minutes. So rather than me just pick on someone, would anyone like to make a point or ask a question or anything similar?
Sorry, can I just say something? Unfortunately, I need to leave you. I'll call it a little emergency.
No problems.
Thank you very much. I'll see you next week.
Take care. See you next week.
Bye.
Elliot, I was just wondering, because you talked about hashtags for Twitter and Instagram, yes? Is there like a rule on how many hashtags a post should have?
They don't, there's no published, as far as I'm aware, there's no published guidance. But I believe best practice is like 5.
5.
On LinkedIn, it's not more than 5. On Instagram, you could. I'm going to say 5, and not more than that. Is anyone on Clubhouse? Sandra, you're on. How have you found it?
Yeah, I thought it's such an interesting concept, and it's kind of like what it reminds me of is podcasts, but like in a non-pre-recorded way. So I think that's really interesting, because the topics are so diverse, and it's like, like there's a lot of like different things happening at any time. And I think it's quite interesting to kind of see the immediacy of it as well. So
run a version of this after we finished it on Clubhouse just to see how it goes. A lot of the rooms are full of some quite strange people. I would say that though. That's definitely a thing. Yeah.
Elliot, there's just a question from my side. It's more specific around Instagram, but just going back to Alice's point around hashtags, I was wondering about tagging companies or tagging other people in the actual post rather than a hashtag, and what impact that has.
Yeah, I think in general that has a positive impact, because if you're tagging the right people in the right way, they are going to engage, or they're more likely to engage on your content, which means, I probably should have said this really, if a brand, the way that most of the algorithms work broadly is that if I go on to someone else's post and I comment on it, particularly if I comment on it, but if I comment and or like it, it will get exposed to my network, even if they are not directly connected to that particular post I engaged on. Again, generalizing, a comment is worth 5 or 10 times the algorithm juice than a like. And obviously a share will just automatically expose. So if I share, someone's content with my network, it exposes it to all of my network. So you could argue that a share is the best, a comment is the second best, and a like is the third best. And that's pretty much, well, that is true of all of the algorithms. It's just a question of how they vary in value.
Brilliant, thank you.
So another way of thinking about that is, if you're certainly for the content that you want, where you want to create awareness and engagement, then trying to motivate the share is definitely an objective, and trying to motivate comments, is definitely an objective. And any other thoughts or questions or comments? Flavio?
No, not really. No, but the likes and the shares now are just, they are different. For instance, on Instagram, if you like something, it stays there. I mean, your connections, they don't see what you're liking. Whereas on LinkedIn, if you like something, it's like resharing, isn't it? Or I'm just getting too confused with all this social media, maybe. But do they work differently on the different platforms?
No, they do work differently. And you are right. You are right in what you say. A like on LinkedIn will expose. It's
like a reshare, basically, on LinkedIn. Yeah, a like.
Yeah, it's not as powerful as a reshare. It's not as worth as much as a reshare, but it is more powerful relative to a like on Instagram.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Good. It was just my curiosity. Yeah.
Yeah. No, look, I mean the per channel tactics. You could run a course on each one, but if you want to talk about Instagram, you've got to get, these days. It used to be 80% of the traffic was in the board, and an emerging amount of traffic was in the stories. To do Instagram, because I know Stefania does it, you need to be in the stories a lot, and then your board is almost like an extension of your profile these days. So you've got to be all over the Instagram stories, and then if those stories get likes or comments, then those stories will be promoted in the home feed. Does that make sense, Flavio?
Yes, but can you reshare a story, or you mean a video or a reel?
No, I mean an Instagram story.
The ones that disappear after 24 hours, those ones.
Yeah. So I don't think you can reach. I don't think you can send it to people in your network, but you can't kind of repost it.
You can reuse them.
You can like add them to your own stories depending on the brand's things. Okay. I think. So, but then it doesn't like directly like show you the entire story. I think I've spent way too much time on Instagram, guys. So I can really where I spend my free time now. But yeah, I think you can do it, but I think it's limited in the way that it kind of pops up. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that this time was not wasted. It's just me learning. There's so many interesting things with my Instagram habits. Very sad.
Okay. All right. So look, thank you so much, everyone, for a lovely day again. I'm going to put the slides. I'm going to put the slides up already. If they're not up already, I'll put them up like now in the next 10 minutes. And if anyone's got any questions, as always, email them to me. I'll stay on the line now if anyone's got any question now. Otherwise, I'll have a lovely week and I'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Very helpful tips. So thank you.
Yeah, thank
Bye.
you. Cheers.
Thanks, Sally.
Take care, guys.